This is for Philosophy 4 at Las Positas College. We are talking about Sextus Empiricus and his skepticism. And we're going to go over some of the modes that are also covered in the reading. Make sure you do that reading as well. So one of the first modes that is in the textbook covered by Sextus is what we will call the third mode, focuses on differences in the senses. Here Sextus points out that the senses oftentimes conflict with each other. For example, take something like olive oil. Olive oil is soothing to the skin but irritating to the taste. As a result, says Sextus, the senses cannot be relied upon to give an accurate report of objects. In a similar way, there may be properties we do not even observe through the senses. Sextus suggests both that it could be that there are properties behind what causes our sensory observation of objects. These properties themselves may not be observable. In a similar way, there could just be properties that we never observe of objects in any way because our senses are not equipped to pick those things up. Sextus talks about, for example, someone who could not see or hear. Such a person might think that they observed everything with the senses that they had. Not knowing about the other possible senses, they wouldn't know there was much more beyond what they were able to sense that was unknown. In a similar way, suggests Sextus, might we not be in such a condition that our senses give us a representation of reality that leaves out much of what is real. A fourth mode that we will talk about, I refer to this as circumstances, conditions, and dispositions. Sextus points out that our age, our attitude, our health, our emotions, whether we're hungry, whether we are inebriated, or wakefulness, all of these things affect how we perceive the world. But if this is so, which one of these states gives us the world as it truly is, gives us the truth, gives us the concrete fact? Sextus wants to say because every time we experience anything, we experience it in specific circumstances, certain conditions, and when we are in a certain disposition, we can't say which of those ones accurately gives us reality as it is, but everything is colored with the circumstances, conditions, and our disposition. And so we can't really say what the world is like, and we have to live in equipollence, suspension of belief, and equanimity. The fifth mode, again, these are the older modes, I refer to as positions, distances, and locations. Sextus points out that things appear differently to the senses from different places. So this one's very specifically about positions, distances, and locations. Because things look different from different positions, distances, and locations, which position gives us the true view of the object? Sextus wants to say we can never say because it's always some position from which we see an object. We can't see an object from all positions or without position taken into account. Therefore, we can never see the object as it is, separate from those positions, and no one position gives us the truth. His examples include a ship might appear large or small, moving or not moving, depending on where you are relative to the ship. Think about if you're moving at the same time as a ship or another car, it might seem like the car is not moving. The ship might seem small from far away or large from up close. Which one is it? Sextus wants to say, well, you can't say. In the same way, objects look different from different angles. Which shape does it truly have? Sextus wants to say, there's no way to differentiate. There's no way to say. And so everything we think we know we can get enough information about it to be useful. But if we go beyond just, this is how I observe it, this is how I act, and instead say, this is how reality is in itself, Sextus thinks we've gone too far. And as a result, we can say, yeah, this is how it appears to me. But we can't say this is how it is in itself for all time and for all people. A sixth mode given by Sextus, again one of the older modes, I refer to as admixtures. And this is just the idea that things are mixed together and never taken one at a time. So we can't see the thing in itself without seeing how it's already affected by the things that it's mixed with. So things, for example, sound differently depending on the thickness of the air. Good observation by Sextus. If the air is thick, it will affect the sound waves passing through it, and it will sound differently than if the air is thin. But which one is the true sound of the object? With no air, there's no sound at all, right? So which is the true sound of the object? Sextus would say there's no way to get to that. There's always just different ways to hear it based on different densities, to use a modern term, of air. Tastes are the same way. They're always mixed with other tastes in our mouth, according to Sextus. And so for this reason, you can't separate entirely the taste of the thing itself from the other tastes that are mixed with it. Which one, then, is the true perception? Sextus is going to say, there's no way to know. Just as much reason to say one is as the other. As a result, we can say, well, this is how it seems to me, but not this is how it is in itself. Quantity and constitution is one of the, to my mind, less convincing examples, but Sextus talks here about ways in which how much of a thing there is when you observe it affects the way in which that thing is observed. So if you observe them one at a time versus several of the thing together, and constitution, how it's put together, how these things affect our ability to perceive the thing. It's perceived differently with different quantity and constitution. As a result, we can't say how the thing is in itself. Your textbook skips here to what Sextus refers to as the latter modes. So these are later in time as far as developments in Pyrrhonian skepticism. We'll talk briefly about discrepancy. This is just the idea that, as Sextus puts it, both with everyday people and with experts, you're always going to find disagreements in terms of anything that you want to understand. So the everyday people are going to disagree relative to questions, let's say, of everything from science to religion. But if we say, let's ask the experts themselves are going to disagree as well. If experts and everyday people disagree with each other, we have just as much reason to believe one or the other. As far as Sextus is concerned, we should decide we cannot know, and as a result, we are skeptical, living in peace with our inability to know. Relativity, you can cover if you want. I don't really want to pull it out separately because it has so much in common with some of the early modes, which are much more specific. But feel free to read that one if you want to. It just talks about how anything we observe is always in relationship to other things, which is covered in several of the other modes. Ad infinitum and hypothesis, the basic idea for this is going to be covered in detail in a separate lecture, so I won't focus on this one now. Circular reasoning. Circular reasoning, according to Sextus, is when the proof itself, which ought to be established, that proof requires confirmation derived from the matter or the thing that we're trying to prove. So we kind of end up with a proof that requires itself for proof in order to work. So it works in a circle in that the evidence itself depends on the thing that we were trying to prove. But if we were trying to prove the thing in the first place, it can't act as evidence for itself. So it's circular reasoning. An example given not by Sextus, there's no examples listed in the textbook here, could go back to something like the idea that God exists. Let's assume someone argued in this way. Well, God exists, says one person, and someone replies, well, how do you know God exists? So we try to give evidence. Say, well, let's say the sacred book says that God exists. That's my evidence for God's existence. But then if we look back and say, well, why do you believe that the sacred book is correct when it says that God exists? And then someone says, well, because God wrote it. Obviously, there's a circular argument here, because unless God exists, God can't give authority to the sacred book, and then the sacred book can't act as evidence for God's existence. So you end up in this circle where the thing to be proved is required for the very validity of the evidence that's proving the thing. Let's try and kind of switch this around a little bit with the same basic result here. So if we were to say something like, miracles don't exist, and someone says, well, how do you know? And then you reply, well, because miracles would break the laws of physics. And someone says, well, maybe that's what happens. How do you know that the laws of physics are never broken? And someone says, well, if the laws of physics were broken, that would be a miracle, and miracles don't exist. So what you see here is someone who ends up arguing that miracles don't exist based on the fact that the laws of physics have no exceptions, but it's only evidence that the laws of physics don't have exceptions. It only holds true if breaking the laws of physics, which is kind of what a miracle is, right, is something that happens not out of natural causes based on laws of physics. So that evidence that the laws of physics don't have exceptions only holds if miracles themselves don't exist. So someone could argue that at least the way this argument was put forward, it's circular in that I would only believe the evidence for the claim if I believed the claim itself in the first place. All right, so you will want to go into the text and make sure that you read these as well, but this is a quick overview of the material right in the middle of that section of the reading in your textbook from Sextus. Hope it's helpful.